Hello everyone and welcome to another exciting episode of Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince.
Vince, today we're going to dissect a word.
Just one?
Yes, just one. We're going to be talking about the word dark.
Oh, okay.
And what that word means.
We can't take the entire D section of the
No, we
dictionary.
can't. No, we can't.
No.
No, we're going to be talking about the word dark. We only have half an hour, Vince. We don't have that kind of time.
Dang.
No, dark. And so here's what we want to do. We hear in our pop culture all the time people talking about things that are dark, people wanting things to be more dark, less dark. And our question today is, what do people mean when they say that? And what are the benefits? And what are the problems with making something darker? And should you make something... Does it always make something better to make it darker? Does it always make something, and does it sometimes make something better to make it less dark? And what does that mean? That's what we'll be talking about today.
You know, I think when people want something dark, I think part of the appeal of that is that it's immediately going to be intended for an adult audience. Mm-hmm. Or at least normally. I mean, if you have something that has themes or ideas or language or visual images that are just not fit for children, something that's a little on the demented side, then I call it dark. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, you can have things that are fit for children that are dark, and that's where it becomes a little convoluted in the idea of how we use that word.
That's absolutely true. I would venture to say that the word dark is the reason Tim Burton got popular.
Yeah. You know, I think Tim Burton is stylistic. Mm-hmm.
And I think that he is probably one of, not to say that I don't like any of his movies, but I think Tim Burton is one of the best examples of dark for the sake of itself.
Yeah. I mean, you just look at the stuff he does. The Corpse Bride, I mean,
that's not a good example.
It's, I mean, a good example of something that's just dark for being dark. Mm-hmm. I mean, you watch the movie, the humor's not even necessarily dark in and of itself. It's just in a world where there's dead people walking around. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily appreciate the darkness in his stuff.
You know, he wants things to be twisted. He wants them to be strange. He wants them to be something that is unusual. And of course, the fact that he does a lot of the same stuff every movie makes it now very familiar to us. But if you go back to his earliest work, where you just look at it and go, wow, that's bizarre, I've never seen that before. And it got popular because it was new. But the question is, when does it actually heighten the work, and when does it just get in the way?
You know, I suppose maybe there's something to be said about breaking expectations of a particular film.
Sure.
I mean, if you go back to, I wouldn't necessarily call this dark, maybe you would call it dark, but the original MASH movie, which I haven't seen, but
I haven't either.
The reason why it was so popular is that Robert Altman was considered a genre breaker. He made a war movie that was a comedy.
Right.
And I would almost call that a dark comedy, something that's making you laugh at things that you wouldn't traditionally laugh at.
Yeah, and that people generally tell you you're not supposed to laugh at.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like Romero's zombie movies, is because there's always humor in there. Maybe it's sophisticated, maybe it's not, depending on how you look at it. But it's about death, and we're laughing at something that is uncomfortable.
Well, things always seem to get more popular when they're pushing envelopes. People want that. Heck, I want that. I mean, you know, we're always looking for the thing that is new. And sometimes what happens is... in fact, very often, especially now, what happens is once something that's air quotes new happens, it then becomes a property. It becomes a it becomes an item for sale. It gets mass produced and redone over and over and over again without the sophistication that it may or may not have had the first time. Mm-hmm. And that's when it really becomes a problem, and that's why I think that this idea of dark has gotten really convoluted, because now it's just become the fad. It's just become the popular thing to do. People say they want things to be darker. People say they want things to be more realistic, and I don't think people always know what they mean by those things.
I had an argument with a person the other day, a friend of mine, and it was an interesting argument because he later admitted that he was wrong about what we were arguing about. But anyway, I digress.
I mean, you don't win a lot of arguments, so I'm impressed.
What are you trying to say, Cap? Anyway, I'm kidding. But the argument was based on Frank Miller showing the other side of reality. He says, you know, you look at the comic books that came out around about the 50s and 60s, and it's all this superheroic stuff, the heroic age, as we're going to call it. And,
oh, we'll get there.
But
you just wait.
But he says, you know, you look at that point, and there's no
Oh, and for the record, that was the Silver Age. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. But there's no representation of the darker side of reality, or at least nothing that we see in the mainstream. And then we get around about the 80s, I think even maybe starting somewhat in the 70s, because some of the things I saw with The Shadow was a little sketchy. But anyway, we had no representation. And when Frank Miller and Alan Moore started tossing their stuff into the mix, we start seeing a surge of just creepy stuff, something that you would actually see in reality that is potentially damaging to a young mind. And then we start calling that dark.
Now, sure, but at the time, I mean, it was new and progressive and interesting because it was something recognizable that was kind of scary, that was in something that it wasn't recognized generally to be in. And so, you know, you take that, you take a genre that's generally considered to be lighthearted, and then you do something scary in it. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's shock factor. We've talked about this before. Yeah. You know, where a shock factor sells because people are excited to get hit with something they haven't seen before. It's the reason people enjoy being scared in films, and it's the reason it's becoming harder and harder to scare people in a movie because we've talked about all this before too. But you know, where you get desensitized and all of that. It's the reason Spawn was so popular so quickly. Is because you know, before that it was very, you know, it was considered by, I'm sure, a lot of people taboo to put the kinds of things on a page that McFarlane was putting on a page. Well, exactly the same thing with Miller, and exactly the same thing with Moore. Yeah.
Now, the reason I bring this particular argument up is that the man I was arguing with, an intelligent man, he said to me that this darkness is reality. He says this stuff actually happens. And I said to him, nay, nay.
My answer to that is always everything happens.
Yeah, you know, at some point something bad happens, but at some point something good happens too.
That's right.
So to have a portrayal of a society that becomes a dystopia, which is what Miller's really good at showing,
right,
is not a portrayal of reality as it exists.
No, it's in fact exactly what 1984 was doing. Because 1984 was, and I just love Orwell. 84 is all about taking the farthest end of an extreme to talk about something that really does exist, to talk about something real. So you go to a point that you know we probably will never get to because the point becomes more clearer that way. So we're talking about, you know, something like 1984, and Miller does this too. We're talking about the dangers of government, and we're talking about the dangers of too much control and all of that sort of thing, of people completely losing their freedoms. And we're not saying that that's the way things are. We're saying that this is the furthest extreme of what does exist, and it's scary because of what it could be in its absolute terms, right? That's exactly what Miller does.
Yeah, V for Vendetta as well with Moore, and exactly was what he was intent with.
That's right.
He's a self-proclaimed anarchist, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
This stuff is all interesting, and I would say this is all dark because this is taking reality to an extreme. Maybe that's what darkness is.
Maybe it is, and let me also throw an irony out there. What's ironic about all of this to me is that we find a lot of people seem to like dark in their entertainment because they think it's more realistic. And the reason I think a lot of people think it's more realistic is because what they're told is realistic on television. The news doesn't show you positive things.
Yeah.
It tells you about the murders, it tells you about all the crimes, and it tells you about the stocks and all the things you don't want to listen, you don't want to hear about, but it's important, so you have to listen to it, right? And it's what sells. I mean, news is almost entertainment in its own right. You know, the media is all about you know, selling people, air quotes, factual things that they want to hear about, right? Mm-hmm. And so because we see so much dark in our reality as it's portrayed by the people who are telling us it's real, we find ourselves wanting that in our entertainment because we've been deluded to think that that's reality. Now, having said that, yes, terrible things happen, okay?
Yeah.
But like you said, good things happen also. The news media is the reason, and I feel like we're getting a little political now talking about this, but you know, the media is very much, I think, the reason that a lot of people get paranoid about certain things. It's the reason, parents get paranoid about, letting their children walk to school by themselves and ride the bus by themselves and things like that. Because the news tells us about all of the kids who ever get kidnapped and who get killed and all the terrible things that happen to children. But you look at the statistics and it doesn't happen that often. It's just that we see it all, air quotes, all the time on the news because that's what's fit to be put on the news. It's a catch-22. You want to know about this stuff. I mean, you want to know.
I mean, look at how popular To Catch a Predator is, or whatever that show's called. Mm-hmm. I mean, the likelihood of your kid getting caught, not that much.
It's really minimal. And I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I mean, it's a lot more minimal than a lot of people would think. And this isn't anything against anybody. It makes sense that people very often think that it happens more than it does because we see it all the time.